In May of this past year, President Obama presented to this year's 13 recipients the highest civilian honor that our country awards, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. This moving and inspiring ceremony singled out those whose contributions, according to President Obama, have made an incredible impact on many, many people. He said that their actions and their work inspired people, enriched lives, and even changed lives for the better. Now, the breadth of disciplines alone is testimony, I think, for life-changing, influential living, regardless of one's chosen occupation. Listen to this list. It's incredible. Musician Bob Dylan, astronaut John Glenn, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, Polish journalist Jan Karski, who died in 2000, Japanese-American Gordon Hirabayashi, Juliette Gordon-Low, founder of the Girl Scouts, Israeli President Shimon Peres, novelist Toni Morrison, civil rights advocate John Doerr, Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens, University of Tennessee, women's basketball coach Pat Summitt, smallpox physician William Fergie, an Atlanta resident, labor rights advocate Dolores Huerta. Now, I looked for patterns. What made these people's lives extraordinary? What I found was that a few of the recipients, like Madeleine Albright, for example, followed what was the expected course of her life, a course that was self-evident given their family histories and the extraordinary opportunities that they had. But I found that most of these who received this highest honor actually considered the questions with which life presented them. And at some point, several of them with several points in their life, made pivotal decisions that altered their life's course and the contributions that they have made to the lives of many. Some made decisions to recognize causes and to take a risk to speak forthrightly about these issues. From John Doerr on the rights of Black Americans in volatile 1960s Mississippi, to Toni Morrison, who speaks and writes about the dangers of censorship in our time now, and Pat Summitt, who bravely struggles publicly with early onset Alzheimer's disease. Others broke away from the masses. They left the expected course of their mapped out lives with decisions that would destine them for world-impacting living. Sometimes those decisions were impulsive. Sometimes they were calculated. But they were always made. This is an obvious statement, I know, but I think we need to remember that these sort of decisions were made at real moments in time, creating from that point on a pivot point from which all that was ahead of them sprang, a fulcrum on which ordinary lives became extraordinary. Let me tell you about three of them. Dolores Huerta was an elementary school teacher. Simple enough, common enough. But she has spent her life working to improve social and economic conditions for farm workers and to fight discrimination against immigrants and women. She was born in 1930 in a tiny New Mexico town and raised on a farm in fairly poor Stockton, California. She completed a teaching degree at a small community college and began to work as a teacher. But she quickly made some observations. She saw that her students, mostly children of area farm workers, were living in poverty without even enough food to eat. But she didn't just feel sorry for them and continue her daily teaching routines. No. She gathered others around her. She learned how to organize and began the Stockton chapter of Community Services Organization to improve conditions for farm workers. and to fight discrimination. But she didn't stop with making sure the children had enough to eat. In addition, she thought on a more global level. She lobbied politicians so that migrant workers without citizenship could receive public assistance and pensions for their work. And she insisted that the state of California create Spanish-language voting ballots and driving tests. And in 1960, Dolores Huerta co-founded with Cesar Chavez the United Farm Workers Union. Even now, at 82, she continues her work to improve the lives of workers, immigrants, and women. And, lest we jump to conclusions and think, well, she had lots of spare time, she didn't have to worry about money. In the meantime, Dolores had 11 of her own children to raise. So imagine that single day in her classroom, that moment in time, when she made the decision to do something, to alter the course of her own life. That moment when she resolved to change something, to take one step towards making a difference. One moment, one decision, to stop the obvious flow of her life's trajectory. Dolores Huerta did it. So can we. Bob Dylan's voice is unmistakable. His lyrics, of course, shaped a generation. So how does a 19-year-old Minnesota college dropout become this acclaimed musician, poet, and iconic voice? Most agree that he did this by joining music and poetry together to address the social issues of a nation and the world with both his youthful new sound and the wisdom of a questioning mind. But part of the genius that made Dylan so enduring was his willingness to change direction, to alter the course of his own life with intention, to take new direction from the current route. And so he questioned himself. He questioned his focus. And even though it diverted him from all that others expected from him, and even time after time invited criticism, he made these changes. Bob Dylan grew up listening to the radio and started writing poems when he was only 8. By 10, he was playing the piano and writing original songs. And at 15, his father bought him an electric guitar, and he began playing in rock and roll bands. But he says this about changing that direction. Rock and roll wasn't enough. There were great catchphrases and driving rhythms, but the songs weren't serious, didn't reflect life in a realistic way. Folk music was more of a serious type of thing. The songs are filled with more despair, more sadness, more triumph, more faith in the supernatural, much deeper feelings. So he changed his course. With his eyes open to social injustices and the fight for civil rights, he incorporated philosophy, social issues, politics, and humor into his music, defying existing conditions of folk music. But by the end of 1963, he was ready to change yet again. He felt overly defined and even exploited by protest movements. So again, he moved his music in a different direction and defied customs yet again. He made his move from writer of folk music back to rock musician, but this time seeking deeper and more broadly for his place of newness and for his contributions. Throughout his life and his career, Dylan sought ways to discover and express himself and to make a difference in art and in the world. But he was constantly in conflict with the industry's expectations of him that would divert him from his own beliefs and his search for meaning in life. So imagine those moments of conflict in which he knew that he couldn't keep going on the road ahead, but he felt pressure to. Another detour called him to the next wisdom to be discovered and expressed. a day, a song lyric that came to him, a headline that would take him in the next leg of his journey. And he went. He went without regard for others' expectations or for the consequence that might befall him. And he took us with him on his search for self-identity and with his courage to continue that journey, even as a famous adult. His journey is perhaps a model worth considering. Jan Karski. Ever heard of him? Anybody ever heard of him? Jan Karski, who died in 2000, was part of the Polish underground resistance movement during World War II. He reported the very first eyewitness accounts of the Holocaust. To do this, he invented numerous identities that enabled him to infiltrate Nazi operations so that he could report, and hopefully, this was his goal, to stop the atrocities that were being inflicted against Jews in Germany and throughout the Reich. A Catholic himself, not in danger, he could have done his job adequately as a reporter and kept himself safe. He could have ignored his suspicions, closed his eyes to horrific realities, but he didn't. Instead, he made the decision to tell the truth. And to tell it, he knew that he had to be just as sure as he could be. And so he risked his life to speak on behalf of those who were silenced. He speaks of choosing this road less traveled, of deciding to live a different life. The language is interesting and the thoughts are complex. Listen and see if you can discern what he's saying. He says this: "It was easy for the Nazis to kill Jews because they did it. The Allies considered it impossible and too costly to rescue the Jews because they didn't do it. The Jews were abandoned by all governments, church hierarchies, and societies. But thousands of Jews survived because thousands of individuals in Poland, France, Belgium, Denmark, and Holland helped to save the Jews. Now every government and church says, we tried to help the Jews. They say this because they're ashamed. They want to keep their reputations. They didn't help because 6 million Jews perished. But those in government, in the churches, they survived. No one did enough." Imagine the day. Imagine the incident, the tipping point at which Jan Karski decided to break the silence and the status quo. I imagine that he had some idea of the treachery that awaited him. But there was a moment in real time when he knew that he could either take the expected path and do his job or choose to follow the beckoning of right. He may have realized the historic weight of that moment of decision, or not. But Jan Karski decided that life as it was going was simply not good enough. So at that very point in time, he did it differently. Our lessons for today have their settings in annual rituals that marked the lives of early Jewish communities. Samuel's parents and the family of Jesus made their annual pilgrimage to the temple. Some things are in common with both these boys. They both remained in the temple, first of all. Samuel, according to the plan. Jesus, according to the violation of a plan. A decision that he made to break with the path before him, to disappoint the expectations of his family. This decision may have altered the course of his life. You see, Jesus simply wasn't going to be, couldn't be, just the eldest son following in the family business, or the parent-pleasing one who would stay the expected course and remain close to his mother's apron strings. Something called him. It called him enough that as a 12-year-old, he intentionally defied his family's expected behaviors with this seemingly insignificant decision. He took a different course than Samuel. He set his own course that would overturn tradition. It would overturn the expectation of the eldest. And it would take on life in a new way. Now I have to ask, was Jesus just a bratty, self-willed adolescent who refused parental authority and expectation? Well, maybe he was that. Maybe partly. But I think there's more in this story and its counterpoint to Samuel. Samuel continued, it says, to grow in both stature and in favor with God and with people. I was taught this verse as a child, you probably were too, to prescribe how we were to toe the line and mature. But Jesus followed his mind and his heart, even to the point of ignoring his parents, of finding his way, the way of conscience and purpose and difference. And of course, I don't know if you noticed this or not, of course, his mother had a thing or two to say about it. I just have to point this out. Did you notice that Holy Mary, Mother of God, made it all about her? Why have you treated us like this? She wails, with a probable mixture of scolding and relief at finding him. In other words, Jesus had a price to pay for breaking the rules, for defying tradition, for making a decision about the focus and course of his life, and that in-the-moment action that would put him on the way to serving God and God's countercultural plan for the world. Now, my point today on the threshold of this new year is not that great people can rise from humble beginnings. That's not my point. Or that anyone can make something better of their lives. That's not my point either. I'm not even trying to say that if we focus on a higher good, we can make our lives count. What I am saying is that our lives, for all of us, our lives are lived with patterns and with sets of expectations that we have for ourselves, that our culture has for us, that our families have for us. Often, following these patterns and fulfilling these expectations leads us to a meaningful life. But it can also lead us into a seldom questioned, preset way of living. When we have, all of us, within ourselves, the potential to live our own unique life and make our own unique contributions for this new day in our own way. The decisions to break free and do something different are all made in real time, in real living, in a year or a month or a moment. And some of these decisions, some of these in real time decisions, can alter our course and our contribution to life and others. And unfortunately, we must say, not to decide is to decide. So whether we're 8 or 80, we can decide to stay in the temple. We can decide to change the course, to alter our course, to change the prescription for our lives, and become more and more all that we can be. I'm not going to encourage us exactly to make New Year's resolutions. Rather, I want to call us each to a personal New Year's revolution, to move out of the past, to do something contrary, to take a different course from what was or from what we assume we will continue to be. Rather, to be all that we can be, to do what we can do, ready to make a decision about what needs to be done around us with the help of God. We may hold on to the way we've always been, out of fear, perhaps. Or we choose the familiar as a way to protect ourselves from change or from the unknown. But we have decisions to make in this real time. Where will we go this new year? Is this the year? Is this the year that we really do what our hearts and souls call us to do? What do we need to leave behind to begin? What assumptions about ourselves, our expectations, our limitations do we need to leave in the past? And then what do we need to claim? What do we need to embrace? Is it courage? Or even energy? Imagination? Self-belief? God-belief? What do we need to embrace to be able to make that decision to do and be the next right thing? We're going to participate in an ancient ritual this morning of the burning bowl. It's not exactly a bowl, but close. If you can imagine the flame not as a destructive force, but as a cleansing force. You have 2 pieces of paper. I invite you prayerfully, with the presence of the Spirit, in the presence of this community, to write on these 2 pieces of paper these 2 things. First, what I need to release in order to move forward in 2013, to do something that I've longed to do, to be something that I've longed to be. What do I need to let go of? What expectation, what fear? Be as specific as you can about what you want to release to the care of God and to the cleansing fire. And then on the other piece of paper, write what it is you want to open yourself to. Maybe it's something really specific that you want to do, to accomplish, or to become, or to learn, or a way that you want to grow. What do you want to open yourself to this year? And write it on that piece of paper. This is the first Sunday after Christmas. We have the promise in Jesus of Emmanuel, God with us. Know that as you make these vows, as you look ahead, that the one who defied convention to follow God's way is with you and will remain with you. Few of the recipients, like Madeleine Albright, for example, followed what was the expected course of her life, a course that was self-evident given their family histories and the extraordinary opportunities that they had. But I found that most of these who received this highest honor actually considered the questions with which life presented them. And at some point, several of them with several points in their life. Civil rights advocate John Doerr, Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens, University of Tennessee, yay, women's basketball coach Pat Summitt, smallpox physician William Fergie, an Atlanta resident, labor rights advocate Dolores Huerta. Now, I looked for patterns. What made these people's lives extraordinary? What I found was that regardless of one's chosen occupation, listen to this list, it's incredible. Musician Bob Dylan, astronaut John Glenn, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, Polish journalist Jan Karski, who died in 2000, Japanese-American Gordon Hirabayashi, Juliette Gordon Low, founder of the Girl Scouts, Israeli President Shimon Peres, novelist Toni Morrison. This moving and inspiring ceremony singled out those whose contributions, according to President Obama, have made an incredible impact on many, many people. He said that their actions and their work inspired people, enriched lives, and even changed lives for the better. Now, the breadth of disciplines alone is testimony, I think, for life-changing, influential living. In May of this past year, President Obama presented to this year's 13 recipients the highest civilian honor that our country awards, the Presidential Medal of Freedom.